Everyone, this is Marilyn with Marilyn Chakota Coaching, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about tapers. Obviously, it's race season, and people are getting out there and hitting the courses and trying to put out some great performances. We do all this hard work, and we can either make or break our races by getting this part of the equation right for us. So, I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about different things with race tapers and just some general thoughts, some ideas. I actually want to show you, you can see here up on the screen, maybe an example of a program for a race week taper. Just an example of one of many different ways that I'm going to talk to you about today. So obviously the purpose of a taper is that you show up to the race mentally and physically fresh and ready to go. So when we train, we create breakdown, we create fatigue, and while we're doing that, we're building fitness, but we're also creating a lot of, tiredness, soreness, fatigue, that kind of thing. And that's part of the training process, and we understand that. And then as we rest or taper, glycogen stores comes up, rest and recovery comes in, and we hope that we see that nice cross point where fitness is really, really high, fatigue starts to come down, and that perfect X marks the spot where fitness and fatigue hit that very, very special spot where it all comes together nicely, where we're really fresh and we're really fit. Fitness hasn't started to drop down yet, and the fatigue has raised away enough that we're able to perform at our best, and we go out there and have these great performances. And this looks a lot of different ways with a lot of different athletes and in a lot of different situations, different time of year, different types of athletes, different builds from year to year, and it's going to change. It's not always the exact perfect recipe every single time. So it depends on the build that you've had into the race, if there's going to be long haul travel, all these different parts that play a factor in whether that taper is going to work perfectly for you this time. So just some general things to look at, how big is your load? So what are your regular training hours look like? Are you training 30, 35 hours a week? Are you training 20 hours a week? Are you training 16 hours a week? Are you training 10 hours a week? Are you training 8 hours a week? What's the intensity of that training? So how high a level of intensity? What's your overall stress level look like with your life? So work, family, all of these kinds of things. So we take all of these pieces and we say, okay, our idea is to bring the training load and the training volume down, but keep just enough work that freshness comes in, and we stay sharp and we stay ready to go and ready to race. So things you're looking at: length of race, number of hours training into it in your load. What kind of, I've already mentioned travel, that's a big one. Is it international travel? Are you driving there? Are you flying there? These are all things. How far out from the race are you traveling there? These things all, make a really, really big difference. One common mistake I actually see is if the training load decreases too much and the rest is actually a little bit too much, and we don't keep that engine sort of ticking over in all the different areas, then an athlete can actually come up short where they actually feel kind of flat or maybe even tie up before a race. I say the word tie up, and that means where you're getting really, really tight, and your muscles get so tight to the point where we're not performing at optimal level when we go to race. So these are all things that you want to look at in your taper, and I'm going to walk you through some of the ideas that I have that help with that a little bit. There's different types of tapers. You hear about the progressive taper where it's a 3-week at the volume and intensity. Maybe the intensity changes in terms of how much overall intensity, but there's just enough there to stay sharp, but the volume progressively gets less over 3 weeks towards an A race. Very, very classically, you see a 10-day taper where you see the hardest work done finishing right about 10 days out, and then we start to see a gradual taper all the way 10 days all the way down the race. So maybe longest, hardest session is that, sort of day 12, 11, maybe even 10, and then it starts to chip down from there and get more and more rest as the race comes in. I've also seen really successfully something called a drop taper, where training stays pretty normal and at high load all the way up until 3 to 5 days before the race, and then there's a huge amount of rest and then just a little bit of sharpening before the race and heads into the race. So you might hear these kinds of terms thrown out there. I've got an article on my site at mcc.coach. If you want to check out that, I've explained that a little bit in there in a couple different places in my library. And then another one that you might see is called a reverse taper. So that might be where the coach freshens the athlete up 2-3 weeks before the event. There's an extreme freshen, so there might be, a big block for 8 to 12 weeks, and then about 3, 4 weeks out, maybe depending on the athlete, it might even be that 2 weeks out where there's a really big freshen and the load is brought way down in terms of intensity and duration and load and all of that. And then race week, actually, there's quite a bit of work into the race. So we refer that to as a reverse taper. So these are different things that you can consider when you do your tapers and start to look at the different ones out there, what might work for you, what might not. The idea is bring the glycogen stores up, bring the fatigue down, let the fitness, that perfect mark where fitness and fatigue cross one another and we're ready to perform well. So those are different things to look at, and I've given you here a little example of what I might say if you have no idea and you're like, I need to start somewhere with some kind of taper. You can always use this kind of a template as an example. I've used this taper many times for my athletes. It's very successful. It's really well balanced, keeping sort of pattern within normal pattern for an athlete's maybe weekly structure, and there's just enough freshening but just enough work to keep them really sharp. So nice aerobic swim on Monday, and this really depends on the athlete, how much they're used to training, all these different moving parts that you're going to take into consideration when building a taper. But this just gives you some idea. You might give them an aerobic swim on Monday, something that's long and easy. I do a lot of light load leg speed training, so that, on the bike is, it's not hard in terms of intervals, but there's just a little bit of turnover, keeping things sharp, moving fast and quickly. And then we have on Tuesday a little bit of a brick, so I want, an athlete to dial in their race intensity, what they're going to be racing at, not too many reps or sets, but just enough work for them, for this athlete in particular. Every athlete, like I say, how many reps and sets and duration is going to depend on the load that the athlete's used to. And then, run off the bike to get used to that with just some strides, open up, and a couple little coordination, fast turnovers. Wednesday is really about dialing in the pace, so a set in the pool that's not that long, but again, a little bit of work where we're dialing in, what the race is going to look like, going right at your exact race paces, feeling that. And exact same thing on the run, maybe a little bit of that, dialing in exactly what that pace is going to feel like that you're going to take out on race day. So, hopefully by the time you get to this week, you've done so much work dialing in your paces, you know exactly what they feel like, but this is just going to be that last fine little tuning of feeling it. And Thursday is a really common travel day for people, and it's a good idea to have a complete rest. I like to rest 2 or 3 days out from a race. A common mistake I see people do is they rest too much right in these last few days. So, they're doing quite a bit to here, and then they have like 3 days off because they're traveling, and then by the time they get here, they're completely tight and flat, and they don't race very well. So I like to have a rest, about 3 to 2 days out. So it can be this day or this day, depending on, what type of athlete you are. And then the next day, just kind of get it moving again a little bit of active recovery, check out your bearings, where you are on the course, that kind of thing, loosen up from the travel, do that first. And then a couple little strides on the run, nothing hard, just an easy jog and a couple pickups and strides and just get the turnover going. And then Saturday, really, if you're racing Sunday, should be about priming that engine and really getting those, the systems switched back on and saying like, hey, we're going to do something really important tomorrow, and just touch into that. When you have an athlete that when they come on race day and they say, man, I felt really like almost like I couldn't catch my breath and I was behind the 8 ball, and it was like I was just dead and flat and I couldn't get on top of my race effort. It might be that these 2 days they need to do a little bit more activation stuff to get their body and their engine primed and ready to race. So I like to do actually a couple of dialing up into race effort, as well as maybe even slightly above race effort, to make sure that the kind of those cobwebs are blown out from the travel and the rest, and we're primed and ready to go. And you have an athlete that often says, hey, I felt finally ready to go and ready to race the day after the race. That is something to look at in their taper as well, that this might work a lot better for them. So it might be that you're swapping these 2 days back and forth, where it's a little easier for them on the Saturday and a little bit more of that priming on the Friday. I find mostly after travel, people are pretty stiff, and it's better to have them go kind of easy with just a few strides the day after travel, and then open up the engine the day before the race and then go ahead and hit the race. So these are just some general thoughts, some ideas, some things that I've seen successful, some things that I've seen that you might want to take into consideration to avoid. Of course, there's hundreds and hundreds of other things to touch on this topic. Like I said, I've got some great articles in my library. I've got some things on actual programming in my guidelines area in my library, as well as just articles on this. And shoot me a message anytime. And if you want to talk about these kinds of things, I've tried all different kinds of tapers on hundreds and hundreds of different athletes. Each athlete is different. Remember, your goal always is to show up ready to race, feeling fresh, mentally, physically, and feeling ready to go. And that's going to look a little different for a lot of different athletes. So don't be afraid to try some of these things out, and hopefully you're going to find your sweet spot and have a great race. Cheers.